Firms and Transformation, a regional ASEAN lens on exploring and exploiting. Today, we have talked about the different systems and complexities of our interconnected world. From a firm-led perspective, not only do firms have to deal with macro megatrends, but they also have to engage with the micro on a day-to-day. Firms have to figure out how to be ambidextrous, to engage in constant transformation, to explore and to exploit. But of course, firms do not exist in vacuums. They exist within wider frameworks. So, for today's session, we will be looking at firms and transformation within an ASEAN framework. Before we begin this session, we have a safe harbor statement from Audrey Charles, one of our panelists today. Audrey's comments today may include forward-looking statements that are subject to risks and uncertainties, and actual results may differ materially. Additional information concerning factors that could cause actual results to differ materially from those forward-looking statements can be found in the risk factors disclosed in LAM's public filings with the SEC, including the most recent 10K filing. With that, ladies and gentlemen, here are our panelists for this core session. Audrey Charles, Senior Vice President, Corporate Strategy, LAM Research. Cack Wilhelm, General Partner at the Institutional Venture Partners. Vikram Rao, Managing Director, Enterprise, ASEAN, Amazon Web Services. And to moderate this session, Selvendran Katheerayson, Executive Director and Head of Real Assets, Khazanah. Selv, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is known as the graveyard session because everybody's just had a lot to eat. I hope we've had some coffee as well, and we're going to try and make this as interactive as possible. I just want to start off by saying that our three speakers, three very distinguished speakers today, have actually suggested that instead of keeping the Q&A till the end, we're going to try and keep this interactive. So we're going to open up for questions right from the beginning. So we hope, if there are questions, the ladies with the signs will be around you, and we're happy to take questions as we move. I think we've all read the session blurb. We're talking about ASEAN today, a continent of 680 million people, roughly twice the size of the United States of America, but with a GDP per cap at 15K, which is about 1/5 the size of the GDP per cap in America. So just to give you an idea of the backdrop against which we're operating in. It's also a highly fragmented continent. We're part of the continent together with other countries. So the population is pretty widely spread out over a nation of islands. So to start off today, I think what we're going to do is we're going to start off talking about the problems that the continent and we're facing. Geopolitical tensions. We're smack in the middle of the US-China trade war, which we've heard so much about today. Higher for longer rates, which is affecting the cost of capital and therefore returns. Supply chain disruptions, which is affecting the flow of goods and services across the continent. Against this backdrop, I thought we would start off by maybe asking our speakers to share a little bit about their experience. And maybe I thought we'll start off with Audrey, who with LAM Research is a leading investor in the semiconductor space. And some of you may know this, but LAM's recently opened a facility up north in Penang, at Batu Kawan, a 1 billion ringgit facility, which has roughly 800,000 square feet of manufacturing facility. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about that. So maybe we'll start with your perspective, Audrey, and then we'll move to the other speakers.
Great. Yeah. First, thank you, Sev. It's really an honor to be here. The sessions this morning have been really thought-provoking. And yeah, I'm really just kind of looking forward to this conversation and hearing as well what other people have to say. I did want to say at the start, I found the concept paper very thought-provoking. As an Irish person originally, potatoes are definitely something that plays a large part in our history. And Nick may not remember this, but the first time we met in Singapore a couple of years ago, we actually talked about potatoes back then. So again, I think that a really interesting kind of thought-provoking concept. And for anybody who doesn't know, the failure of potato crops in Ireland in the mid-1800s actually caused a very severe famine and completely changed the landscape of the country, affected the demographics for well, still today. So with that, I think it's a great example of why resilience is really important, and we definitely could have done with having another potato at that time. So today, for people that maybe don't know LAM Research, and I'm sure a lot of you may not have heard of LAM, we are a semiconductor manufacturing equipment company, and what that means is we supply equipment, processes, and services to our customers who manufacture these semiconductors that you've been hearing so much about today. So from leading edge processors to memory chips, that's basically what we do. And it's, again, semiconductors today is just so present to kind of everything that's going on, and really kind of at kind of the center of what we need to think about from an innovation perspective.
Both a unifying and a divisive sector in terms of applications and geopolitical
Yeah,
settings.
absolutely.
Interesting. So we'll talk more about that. Over to you, Cack. I think as a leading venture capital investor, you bring a different lens to this panel, and we'd really like to hear your thoughts around how your companies and the companies that you're looking at are dealing with these challenges that we're confronted with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like Audrey, very, very honored to be here and to have spent a lot of time with the Khazanah team and the Malaysian ecosystem over the last few days and week. Yeah, I think we find ourselves at an interesting point. I think so. My context is I work at a venture firm, so I work in Silicon Valley. We invest in sort of Series B, Series C, early stage startups, and I think one of the beauties, something I've really noticed talking to a lot of the Khazanah team is there's so many stakeholders. So you might run a funds program and you're thinking about financial returns, but at the same time you're thinking about what the Prime Minister said this morning and sort of the initiatives of the country and how does that impact the average citizen in Malaysia, and how does that all bring innovation back to the ecosystem here. What it makes me realize is I sort of have the luxury at a venture firm in the United States, we're very financially returns driven, and so we don't also have these multi-level constituents that we're always keeping in mind and taking into consideration. As a result, a lot of the companies that we invest in, we're investing majority US and Europe. Our advice to them would actually be to sort of disassociate themselves with the macro and focus more on the things that they can control, because the macro is simply not something, the outcome of the election in a month from today is not something that any entrepreneur in America can control. I wish I could, trust me. So we focus our entrepreneurs more on sort of the minutia, what are the things they can control today and what are the things they can control tomorrow, and the hope being that the rest will sort of figure itself out.
Yep. Thank you, Audrey. Vikram, your perspective, I think both from your experience having run the ASEAN business for AWS, but also because we're talking about innovation, your experience having personally been involved in startups that you've exited, maybe your perspectives.
Thanks, Sal, and thank you again, echoing other people's comments here as well, that really a privilege to be here and learn from one another. The morning sessions were again really, really valuable in terms of insights and how we introspect as to how we could do better. I myself am no stranger to ASEAN. I've been here since '97, so ASEAN is my home now, and I've spent a significant amount of that time in Malaysia as well. So I've seen various phases of development. And again, going back to some of the discussion in the morning, while there are all these challenges, and again, from a macro perspective, whether it's the economy or it's the US-China discussion that we had, From a digital transformation perspective, since COVID, we've seen an acceleration. And this acceleration exists in ASEAN across not only enterprises, but I mean, startups, of course, the startups as they evolve to larger digital companies. We've seen governments as well being really proactive in terms of adoption of cloud and the need to kind of respond to their constituents in terms of digital experiences. So we've seen really an opportunity. And as we said, irrespective of all the macro factors out there, what we see is there is a big opportunity. The technology can really bridge some of these things as we look to create a bigger whole across ASEAN in terms of services or in terms of building strong businesses. So we continue to remain bullish, and I think very optimistic about both the medium term and the long term.
Thank you. So maybe we'll move on to the topic of innovation, which we, in the corporate sector, we typically associate with venture capital and early stage venture capital and early and mid stage. And so maybe, Cack, we'll get your thoughts on this, right? I mean, within the ASEAN context, which we've been sharing a little bit about with you, exits have been seen to be challenging. There's a lack of liquidity in capital markets to support some of these exits. Public free float is low in a lot of these capital markets, and there's also overhang with higher SOE investments in these markets. So a lot of startups, I think you were reflecting as well on where ASEAN startups are looking for exits. But maybe as you talk about that, maybe just to share a perspective, is this an ecosystem problem or is it a mindset problem? How do you see this?
Simple question. Super simple answer, too. Okay, let's see. So we mostly focus on US and Europe, which I mentioned.
Yeah.
Historically, we were more US, and I think we found ourselves pulled into Europe. I parallel that because I think there will be a move where people get pulled into the ASEAN region for reasons similar to Europe. I think Europe also is a sort of like disparate set of countries, different languages, so it probably has more parallels to the ASEAN region than, for example, the United States. With Europe, what we found was, there are companies that are unique to Europe. So take a company like TransferWise, now called Wise, or take a company called by the name of DeepL. Those both actually take advantage of the dynamics of the ecosystem. So TransferWise is for transferring currencies, and if you have multiple countries with different currencies, as you have here, like that originates the need for TransferWise, that same need wouldn't be true in the United States. Same with DeepL. DeepL is focused on language translation between pairs of languages. Okay, well, you don't really need that in the United States because we speak English.
Yep.
But you might need that here because you speak a varied range of languages, even within the country of Malaysia.
Yep.
So we really see that as opportunity. I think that's opportunity here. Now, innovation isn't obviously going to just turn on overnight, and I'll be back on stage in a little bit, and I'll be talking about this a little bit. So you need sort of the dynamics of an ecosystem to come together. And the United States, and especially Silicon Valley, has a lot of the pieces of that innovation, that ecosystem. So you have like favorable taxation, you have even just a culture of risk-taking. Something that we talked about when we were bonding as speakers this weekend was just like, the celebration of failure in Silicon Valley is something that I'm not sure is as present and prolific here. So I use the example at a lot of high schools in the Bay Area. They actually have walls where you post up all of your rejection letters from university. And what that's trying to do is just normalize everyone's going to get rejected from college. But if you feel kind of like self-conscious if you got rejected, but everyone got rejected. So if you have a wall where everyone is just normalized that like, I too got rejected from Harvard, or from experience, I too got rejected from Stanford, I think that's healthy behavior. So some of that is like, probably needs to like flow through the water system here. Yeah. The last thing I'll say, and I actually think this is really important, is I think my advice to Malaysia, here's my advice to Malaysia. I think you guys would be well served to have a more open perspective of sort of like what success is. So you look at a company like Grab, and I think some of you might be like, oh, but they raised money elsewhere and they listed somewhere else. Grab is a Malaysian company. Plenty of companies are going to list in the United States, or some of our great European companies are going to raise money from the United States because they want access to the US capital markets. That doesn't mean that the European company was a failure or it ceases to be a European company. It's still a you know, TransferWise is still a British company, even if they, well, I think they listed in Europe, whatever, bad example. So I think there's an element of that. I think there are a lot of Malaysian successes that, yes, maybe they took some capital markets here and they listed somewhere else, but I think it can still be a tremendous success for the country of Malaysia.
Thank you. Thank you. So, you know, we'll come back to the topic of ownership and the business, where the business operates out of. Maybe, Audrey, LAM's perspective, I think it's been here now for 2+ years, and one of the things that LAM looks for is, you know, investments in disruptive companies that bring new ideas and new solutions to the semiconductor space. And we actually have another session on the semiconductor sector after this, but it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts, having the team that I'm here.
Absolutely. So we opened our facility in Penang in 2021. It's 800,000 square foot manufacturing space, our largest manufacturing facility. And back to kind of like the innovation topic, we really found like a thriving kind of ecosystem here relative to best practices, best in class. And it's been like phenomenal for LAM, fastest ramping factory in our history, recently shipped our 5,000 module. But it takes collaboration, right? So I think back to when we think about, you know, what's important for getting results for innovation. And it's really about kind of like that infrastructure, that platform, collaboration with local agencies, state and federal, collaboration with universities, collaboration with high schools, collaboration with the community. And all of these things build on each other, right, to provide the right environment where our employees are extremely connected to the company, have like a lot of not just pride, but ownership for what's going on and getting the best results. And I think, again, that's really what we all hope for, but I think, again, what LAM really, from a culture perspective, really kind of appreciates about kind of like our globally distributed sites is that's how you get the power, right? That's how you get the synergies, and being able to create that is, well, again, it's back to kind of existential for companies, because if you're not getting that, then you're not going faster, and in this industry, if you're not going faster, then that's going to be a problem.
Yep. So distributed innovation, I've heard this, it's strange that I've heard this term from several of you over this weekend. And it's interesting how you think about innovation, not having to, I mean, it's great to have a cluster like you have in Batu Kawan, but you don't always have to operate through a geographically inclined cluster. You can also operate through distributed centers of innovation. But just want to come back. So when you talked about your experience with the local team at LAM in Penang, is there anything particular that you've seen, any form of innovation or any ideas that you've seen coming out of your domestic local team here?
I would say a highlight for us has been, well, we had the opportunity to build from the ground up here.
Yep.
Like LAM is a 40-year-old company. But when we think about transformation for our firm, back to the theme of this session, we're very passionate about, we have to use the technology we're creating to get better. So digitalization. And in Malaysia, in Penang, in both our factory and our recently opened warehouse, we have been able to really kind of incorporate best practices with respect to automation. And that's something, again, where we're seeing kind of great results, not just from the kind of productivity increase, which was mentioned earlier, is, you know, what we want to do from an, like, evolving kind of value creation, but also from a sustainability aspect, it's really important as well. So the ability to kind of reduce waste, to optimize cycles. And so some of the practices that we have in place here in Malaysia, we're actually going to be kind of, when we think about how we implement those globally. So kind of bringing back the innovation from here. So again,
so ideas that innovate here that LAM may want to use for your other locations.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I could say digitalization, automation is, I think, really a very key and important theme.
Thank you. Thank you. Vikram, innovation, your own personal experience pre-AWS, I think we reflected a little bit on that, your journey as an entrepreneur, and twice, and exiting Tree. Is it Tree? Sorry. Sorry.
1 year to exit, hopefully.
Okay. So maybe your perspective, because a lot of that work was done here in this continent, ASEAN. So I think it's very relevant to the topic here today.
Yeah, again, I think this, yes, there's been a reduction in the number of exits, and there's stats to that saying, 44% of, in 23, 44% of investments in PE dropped versus the last 5 years before that, or 65% in exits dropped. But I think I just feel this is a little bit cyclical. When I set up my second firm, actually, based in ASEAN, it was a firm focused on analytics, when analytics was not a word. It was data-led marketing. And we consciously chose that we would work with ASEAN customers because we were proximate to the market, we were based here. The natural approach at that time was to go to the US or to go to Europe and then play the cost arbitrage to India in terms of the skill and cost arbitrage that we would have. Primarily, it was a cost-based play, and we said we won't do that play. We are going to do a value-based play, which says no matter what the cost, are we adding value to our customers' businesses. And thankfully, again, we had that running for about 7 or 8 years, bootstrapped completely. Those days, there was no funding available, really. Even venture was non-existent. Friends and family was the best you could get. And we went bootstrapped, and as we began discussions for an exit with various parties, and then eventually IBM acquired us, it was 2009, so the crisis had just hit. But we stayed confident to the value we were generating, and that's what I think the message is. I really think that if you solve a real problem, and if you solve and you focus on building value, I really think that you can get those exits. Now, you might not get the exit that everybody kind of dreams of. It might not come at a time that you want, but I think if you're patient and build for the long term, it's definitely the case. And now if you kind of move it over to my own experience at AWS as well, we continue to see the same thing, right? If you take long-term decisions and if you support a lot of these companies in the early stages, the exits will come, right? And I think the things to focus on today, for example, is if you're building a cross-ASEAN startup, how do you start to build it for scale from the ground up? How do you use technology to reduce costs? By moving to the cloud, for example, you can save 66% of your cost of ownership. It's very elastic, right? The second thing is, even AI today, I mean, nobody has all the answers, but as companies experiment with AI, there's a company here called 123RF, which is the global leader in stock photography and video content. They use AI. They launched in 2023 a service that allows users to generate images based on text descriptions. That brought speed into their business. It doubled their, half their go-to-market time, and also increased their sales significantly. Carsome uses AI to actually inspect their vehicles. So again, I think if you focus on value, and that's my own personal experience, and we share that here, and if you stay committed, it will translate to the market and the companies valuing your innovation. So that's my observation.
Okay.
One quick thing is just like on the exits and the reduced exits in the region, just so we're not too hard on ourselves in the region, I mean, I think they're also down. If you look at it on on an absolute basis, sure, compared to 2020, 21, 22, like they're down relatively, but or absolutely, but relative to other regions at the same time, I mean, exits are way down in the United States and Europe too. So it's not a regional,
ASEAN-only phenomenon.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
So we have some questions coming in. I think, Cack, you seem to have hit a nerve somewhere. So two sort of connected questions. How do you see the VC ecosystem in ASEAN evolving? European VC didn't grow as much as in the US, in part because it is not a homogeneous market.
It's not what?
It's not a homogeneous market. Many startups eventually have to move to the US to grow. How can the ASEAN ecosystem overcome this? So I think it's a bit of antithesis.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to read all of that with a very positive. Oh, is there another?
Yeah, because it's connected, so I think we should do both. And the second actually names you, so I have no choice but to send the question to you. Would like Ms. Cack to explain to how to view Malaysian successes more openly, particularly on how tangible impacts are flowing back to Malaysia if companies list elsewhere. How will Malaysia benefit? So, yeah.
Oh, I see some of them here.
Yep.
Okay. First, I'm going to read all those questions with a very positive tilt, in that I think there's a win-win-win story here. And then secondly, I am going to caveat that I'm no expert on the region, okay? So all I can do is speak from experience, having worked a lot in the US and Europe, and I can relate those experiences to what I think might or could happen here. Okay, there are a lot of questions in there. I think, okay, firstly, I think so let's take a company like, we'll use a hypothetical company. I think many companies, the CEO, let's take Snowflake in cloud. The CEO lives in Bozeman, Montana. Okay, so does that make the company a Montana-based company? Does that make, you know, it's incorporated in Delaware. Does it make it a Delaware company? They have regional experts all across the world. So what is Snowflake? Well, Snowflake's an American company. You know, but I think it's too simple to call it just like a California-based tech company. I think likewise, many take like Israeli companies. Israeli outputs a ton of cybersecurity companies. Most of them will end up having R&D in Tel Aviv, and then they'll have most of go-to-market, so all of the sales and marketing functions, even executive leadership, will eventually move to either New York or San Francisco. They'll do that because commercially that's the best place to be. They'll do that because of access to capital markets. They will probably eventually raise venture capital from the West or the East Coast of the United States. However, I don't think that takes away from it being an Israeli success. CyberArk, I mean, there are bazillions of companies that I would say are 100% Israeli companies, even despite having a lot of leadership in New York City, in San Francisco, et cetera. So I think that's one of the, like, how could we be more open-minded to thinking about Malaysian companies as being Malaysian successes? I think it's okay if they raise money elsewhere, if they deploy people elsewhere, if they employ people elsewhere. This morning, someone spoke to me about a company by the name of CoinGecko. Is this familiar with people in the audience? Maybe. Sounds like it's cryptocurrency analytics firm based here. Bootstrapped. I think, and the suggestion to me when it was discussed was sort of like, they're going after a global market, therefore it dilutes the amount of success that Malaysia is going to have from it. I have a totally different perspective. I think my perspective is, here you have this successful company that's bootstrapped in country, employed a lot of people here, and if they eventually reach a global audience, I think that's all good things for Malaysia, because I think the best thing that Malaysia can do is have 5 big names, you know, Grab and let's just pretend Airbnb and Snowflake. If they were all founded here, even if 70% of the employees are based somewhere else and it reaches a global audience, I think that's a tremendous win for the country.
Yep.
So that's my attempt at answering like 4 questions in one.
Yeah, it's quite a loaded question. So I thought, thank you. I like the win-win-win approach. There might be a lesson in there somewhere, in the sense that how do we view success here in Malaysia for our companies? You know, do you have to be successfully operating and listed here in Malaysia, or can you be? I think that's one of the key takeaways from this session today. Okay, we're supposed to be also looking at ASEAN specifically, sorry, there's a question from Anthony. Can somebody get a mic for Anthony?
Thank you, Sal.
Yeah.
Anthony Lau, Time.com board. I congratulate Khazanah for coming out with such a very sharp video and call to action on Megatrends. I think it has raised a lot of questions and perspective to look at things from different insights and perspectives. I would like to raise one important call to action, and I feel it is not adequately covered so far today. That is, shouldn't we be investing more into millennial effects? Because if you look at the millennials today, 75% by the year 2025 are going to be millennials. And they are going to spend 17% more into consumption of technology, innovation, and lifestyle products. Question I just wanted to raise is, when we look at ASEAN versus China, because today we are in an epochal change. the demographic pyramid is actually, in the history of mankind, is upside down. There are more people over 65 than people under 5, which means that we have to think of the demands of the millennials, who increasingly is going to be 75% of the workforce, 75% of the consumption. So the question is, what are the opportunities within ASEAN? Because I see ASEAN as a younger population, and millennials are becoming a very important mega trend, which build verticals for our innovation growth and growth of capital in the countries.
Okay.
Could I comment? Yeah, I think it's a really important comment, and I'm going to talk about it from the workforce perspective, if that's okay. LAM is a very business-to-business orientated company, but I think it's a critical point relative to engagement of the workforce, because in the end of the day, right, innovation comes from people, right? And there's been a lot already mentioned today, right, about how you have to have diversity, right, how you have to have the right environment to promote that. And increasingly, it's also really accepted that purpose is a really important part of that. It's got to feel connection to the company, connection to what the company is doing. And I don't want to generalize, and of course, there are regional differences, there are cultural differences, but I think sustainability is a call to action for this generation. I shared with a couple of people already, it's amazing to see the engagement in our Malaysia workforce around sustainability. They are very proud that 20% of the electricity for the site is solar generated on site. It's our largest employee resource group. And they're not just, oh, we're glad that this is kind of like LAM's policy and we have water reclaim. Like, they are actively pushing the rest of the employee base on lights, cooling, like infrastructure. So, and I think again, then tying back to, as a company, if you can say, we're digitalizing, we're cutting out waste, we want to use virtualization tools, right, in order to kind of cut down emissions, have more efficient products. These are things, I think, again, that are very motivating for people. So, and I know sustainability is also a topic we were going to touch on, but I think it's, again, a really important area, not just required because of the gray rhino concept and climate change, but also, I think, is a means to actually drive progress that will engage people also.
Thank you. And it's interesting, I think that particular sustainability initiative at LAM Research Facility in Penang was not top-down. It was driven by the workforce on their own, right?
Yeah, there's an important, like, workforce element to it. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. Any other?
Yeah, no, I was also going to say, I think, absolutely, I think we should, but I also feel that we, in our own capacities, need to be able to enable, I mean, for us, for example, at Amazon, one of the critical things is to hire well and then hire people with those sensitivities to say, and then we have a culture that we establish around it. So again, you know, in the last few years, we've realized the importance of it, and I don't know if everyone has heard about the Amazon leadership principles, but we added a 15th and the 16th, which said that, you know, with great scale comes great responsibility, and I think that's something that the youngest in our workforces really take on and kind of create activities around and passionately represent in our daily lives, right? So I think not only are these external trends bubbling up through the startup ecosystem that we support, but they also are internally championed with our workforces. So I think the important thing here is really to be conscious of those and invest behind those in the early stages. And there's a whole tagline around possibility versus probability. And I really think that if you're looking at possibility, then you need to see these smaller signals and invest behind it in the early stages so nothing gets lost and you don't average out these observations to really kind of not take after them. So that's my point of view here.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything else you want to add, Cack?
I mean, here, I'm the optimist, I guess. I am less familiar with sort of priorities and megatrends in Malaysia. I will say that I'm encouraged. I spent some time with your finance minister over the weekend, and his articulation of the problem statement and the solutions as it relates to aging in the population here was really well formulated, and it seemed like there was a lot of like concrete steps in place for what needs to happen. You know, as communities, as kids move out and multi-levels of communities don't all live together such that grandparents are taken care of by younger generations. But the articulation of sort of what the problem statement was and what you guys were doing about it was, it seemed better articulated than the United States, for example. So I surmise that if people put their heads together on millennial workforce and what that means for the country, I'm confident you guys can conquer that too.
Thank you. I don't think we answered all the aspects of your question, Anthony, but your questions have never been easy. Anthony is an independent director on the board of Time.com, and is one of the reasons why Time is probably one of our best performing companies in terms of TSR, because he keeps management on its toes. Sorry, coming back to the topic here today, maybe I just want to move to the topic of regionalization and the role of ASEAN, because Malaysia is going to be host to ASEAN. We'll be starting the role soon, and we want to talk about innovation in the ASEAN context. So maybe, Cack, I want to just start with you first and talk about how you guys sort of selected Penang, which is probably the greatest place in Malaysia. It's not Malacca, which is what Hisham was trying to say. It's Penang.
Some support.
Hisham, see, they're scared of Hisham, so that's why they're not clapping. And how did you choose Penang? And how do you see Malaysia, amidst what's happening in the geopolitical front, right? We've heard so much about it today. The role for Malaysia and within the context of ASEAN in the global semiconductor chain. Your thoughts?
Yeah, great, Sev, thank you. So we've heard a lot about it today, but maybe stepping back a little bit, the COVID-19 kind of pandemic in that era, and then the resulting kind of chip shortage really cemented for people, right, this criticality of semiconductors to basically everything, and the importance of having a secure supply chain of semiconductors. And with that, what you have seen is kind of over 300 billion, right, in incentives announced around semiconductors in the following years. So when you think about resilient supply chain, this need to distributed innovation being important, right, in order to kind of realize value. And you think, what's important, like relative to being able to make progress. And it kind of comes down to a couple of key factors, right? Workforce is one that we talked about quite a bit. Definitely I'll say a business-friendly environment, supportive policies, and I'll say a commitment to kind of growth, right? And when you think about the ASEAN region in general, I think there's a great foundation there relative to these three vectors of increasing manufacturing capabilities, skilled worker availability, and supportive policies. And that really, I think, sets up a very nice kind of trajectory for growth in kind of a fast-growing industry. And that's definitely, again, was key factors for LAM in the selection of Malaysia and in selection of the site in Penang. And like I say, I think these are the things that are important kind of across the board when you think about kind of growth, distribution, new operations.
Thank you. Talent, policy, and infrastructure. Right? These are the three things that you've talked about today. Cack, I think you've told us that ASEAN is not necessarily a key focus area, but just maybe your experience in developing Europe. So I think you've been on both sides of Europe, the developing side and the developed part of Europe. And what have you seen there? I think today we, in our keynote session with Michael, I was really taken up by the Estonia story. Right? That's an amazing story of change. But what else have you seen in Europe that might be relevant or applicable to ASEAN?
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out in Europe is I think the most, and you touched on this a little bit with authenticity, but I think the most successful companies are the ones that solve a really unique problem to them versus trying to copy another problem from somewhere else and apply it. I think that shows up in the founder that's going after something that they genuinely believe. Like, a founder comes into being, as you did 3 times, because they see something that doesn't exist and no one else is going to solve it unless they solve it. And therefore, they leave their high-paying job and their stable income to go out and venture forth and make the world different. But if you're venturing forth to make the world different and you're just copying something that's been tried in the United States and then you're applying it to a different market, I think the resolve and the resilience to continue and really go all the way and go public is probably lesser, just because you don't have the intrinsic motivation for changing the world, and you're probably in it because you see an opportunity. So our most successful European companies, I think, as I mentioned with TransferWise and Depot, they hinge on something that's unique to their market. And then I think it takes a really authentic approach that they didn't graduate business school and set out to start a company. I think it's just one day as they were ideating with their friends and realized that this thing didn't exist that should exist. I think that very much would apply here, because I think it's like we were discussing Gojek versus Uber and Grab. The bike ecosystem isn't a thing in the United States. That wouldn't make any sense to start in the United States, but that's a very unique opportunity that would be unique to an ecosystem. So I think that is where a lot of the Europe learnings would apply here. It's that same entrepreneurial mindset, which you're going to hear from a few founders in a little bit, talking about their companies. I think we're all going to be very inspired.
That's interesting. This thing. This is very interesting, actually. Earlier today, I bumped into somebody who's one of the founding partners at Merchant Trade, which is a sort of Malaysian platform that developed around the same time, but really to address the need, a specific particular need of foreign workers who needed a mode to transfer money back. And I believe Axiata is an investor in that business as well. So interesting that when you thought about that, I talked about we beat ourselves that we don't have enough innovation. We do, but it's there in little pockets and growing at its own pace, right? So interesting. Vikram, as the head of AWS's cloud business in ASEAN, what do you see as opportunities or platforms for ASEAN to either collaborate? We heard a lot about cooperation and collaboration earlier today, and how that breeds innovation on its own at Michael's session. But maybe you could talk to us from an AWS perspective, and maybe some things that have worked for AWS or Amazon elsewhere that could work here.
Yeah, I think, like I said, having stayed here so many years, I'm really bullish about Amazon through my startup career. Sorry, bullish about ASEAN. I say through my startup career as well as my last 5-6 years at AWS, right? And that's evident in our investments in the region. We had a data center which we launched in 2011 in Singapore. We have one in Indonesia now. We are kind of investing. We announced we went live in Malaysia with a $6.2 billion investment, about 29.2 billion ringgit investment in August with our data center here. And we are soon to also launch one in Thailand. So 4 of the 6 countries is where we put this scale of investment. And each of these, we do an economic study every time we put in an investment of this magnitude, as you would imagine. Each of these has significant impact within each of the countries we operate in. There is a stat which says every 1% increase in cloud adoption by companies within a country or a market increases. For example, in Malaysia, the net GDP contribution of that 1% cloud adoption is about $2.3 billion over 5 years, right? And that's about 0.5% of GDP contribution. Now, and if the policies are favorable, and the cross-ASEAN policies are favorable as well, that could go as to, in the case of Malaysia, could go up to 0.8%. So every percentage point, and this is where we kind of say, this investment of 6.2 billion will create 3,500 jobs on an average annually just from the data center side. And then all the other effects, we project another 57 billion total ringgit of contribution across, in the surrounding ecosystems as well. So how do you kind of really take that and then you kind of invest behind startups? You invest behind a lot of these trends, you invest behind these ideas, and cloud allows you to fail quickly and fail fast, but kind of succeed in that process as well. So how do you do that, and how do you pick up the signals? And for every one of these companies across ASEAN, while we have and we celebrate our diversity, there are a lot of similarities as well. So I see over the last 5 years, a lot of our startups, they don't see borders. If they started in Malaysia, they go to Indonesia. There are a lot of people who've relocated from Singapore to Vietnam and built very successful businesses in the fintech space. So I think the startup segment is actually not seeing borders. I think we can do more to promote it. But for example, cloud is an underlying infrastructure that can really help you globalize quickly. So if you're building a business, then do those fundamentals correctly so that when it's time to scale, you can scale quickly. And it's not all that investment again into a new country or a new market. So I think this has worked everywhere else, and this works here as well. And I feel that's something that is critical as we look at all these. We should celebrate more of these regional successes and look to scale them as well.
But not just any cloud, right, Vikram?
So I'm not saying that right now, but yes. So yeah, he didn't say that. But interesting. But maybe within the Amazon operating model, I think we've all heard legends of how the company encourages failures at a firm level through experimenting with new ideas. Can you share some examples of
yeah, that? I think Audrey touched on this a little bit. I think every time we talk about this word digital transformation and technology transformation, but what is critical, if you peel that down, is the transformation actually that is happening is of people. It's the people in your business that learn new skills. It is basically a digital transformation that is underpinned by a cultural transformation, and that essentially is people. So for us at Amazon, again, we have this whole concept, and I came from a startup, so when I joined Amazon, it really resonated with me. We have this word that captures our culture in one word, right? And I have not found another word, and Jeff captured this really well. He said, we are always striving at Amazon for it to be day one. And what we mean by day one is if you imagine your first startup and it's the first day, if you remember the excitement of your new idea, if you remember the hunger of making it successful, if you remember the paranoia that if I don't do anything before I go to sleep, somebody else will have this idea, that drive, that curiosity, right? That grit and that resilience. I think that the only word I've seen really that captures it effectively is day one. So for us, even for example, it's been 6 years at Amazon now, so I never say, I've had whatever 365 into 6 days. We always say we've had 365 day ones, or we've had 1200 day ones. So that really is, I think, critical. And I think the entire culture should be about building speed. The new currency of successful businesses is speed. It is your ability to react to the market, the ability to respond to customer features. So everything you do to structure yourself, the organization, our teams, our communities, our business, our governments, has to be able to respond to that speed. So how do you create? So a simple example, we have something called a 2-pizza team. It could be a 2-potato team as well. But what we say is we shouldn't have team sizes working on problems that are greater than what it takes 2 pizzas to feed, right? If I really like pizzas, so it could be a 2-person team, but for normal people, I think it would be about 8 to 10 people. You reduce the number of people, you bring as much diversity into that 8 or 10 people because we love friction, we love disagreements. Without that, you will never, really go deep into an idea. And then you leave them to do their magic. And then when they come back, all that adds up. So that culture is something we're very passionate about, and that's something we work with our startups as well on. Anthony has his hand raised.
Oh, another question from Anthony. Sorry, is the mic working? Yeah, I thought that the next question will be for all of us.
Yes. I have a question because the comments made triggers off a lot of other questions. But just one area I'd like to focus on, that is the ASEAN transformation. If you look at the theme of Khazanah, which is very well illustrated, the pursuit of potatoes, China did not continue with growing potatoes the same way as they got from the Philippines. If you look at the potatoes today, they have gone into vertical farming, and the potatoes are hanging from the net, and the roots are actually getting the nutrients from the ground, not the soil, from the ground. And when they harvest it, they harvest the fruit without uprooting the whole plant like we used to, or we are still doing. My point is, speed is needed in transformation, but at the same time, we need to pivot our business model. Pivoting business model is like taking the sweet potato, plant it on the ground, and when you harvest, you have to dig up the whole thing and then destroy it to collect the sweet potato. But now you're talking about vertical farming, and in China, there's a lot of technological changes in agricultural production, like using drones, using technology to fertilize, getting all the companies like Alibaba, Tencent to go and contribute to agricultural renovation and agricultural rejuvenation. So my point is that because China used to be feeding 20% of the population with 7% of arable land, very little arable land, and they have to depend on a lot of countries, particularly also Asia, Global South, and ASEAN, to import in agricultural produce. Shouldn't be an opportunity for ASEAN to think about modernizing our agricultural productivity, speed to market, because this is an area that we can learn a lot. And China has shown even Fitbit that is planted on the chicken leg to just see that the chicken is moving around and not lying down too much and building weight. Yeah. So my point is that modern technology can be used to help us pivot to the next area of transformation in ASEAN.
Thank you, thank you. Actually, this is somewhat linked to the part in Michael's book. I'm not sure if he spoke about it today, where he talks about scarcity of food and how supply chain disruptions may disrupt. So I'm not sure if anybody in this panel has had any exposure to modernization from agriculture or food production.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of examples that are like that. I think we've heard, e-fisheries in Indonesia. They kind of use AI, IoT, they call it, to enhance production of fishing by 25%. There's a couple of other companies to that exact example, Anthony. I think we have Chicken, which is an Indonesian startup, or Broiler X. Again, there are a lot of these startups that have these ideas. But I think collectively these ideas have to be invested in. And as we know in the ecosystem as well, there's no one big bang idea that you suddenly get one day. You just keep working at it every day. And if you do it incrementally well, then you will come up to the final realization of that idea. But couldn't agree more, yeah.
Thank you. Maybe I thought we've got a couple of minutes left. We look at any further questions. I thought I wanted to ask each of you from your perspectives and everything that you've heard over the last weekend about Malaysia, about ASEAN, and your parting thoughts around the idea of what is it that, as a continent, as a country, as a market, what can we do on this front?
Well, I would say, again, going back to semiconductors and ASEAN, I think there's a tremendous opportunity back to kind of like this huge kind of global focus on making sure that there is distributed and secure supply chain for semiconductors, the strong support in the region for the development of semiconductors. Most of the countries in the region have announced incentives, and several of those have been this year. what I also like, and kind of building a little bit on what Vikram said as well, and to the question, is this intentionality about areas of focus, right? So I've also had the opportunity to see the National Semiconductor Strategy that was announced earlier this year. Very intentional relative to areas that there's going to be focus on, that are going to promote. And as we've all said, right, like an innovation, entrepreneurial ecosystem, or any ecosystem, requires a lot of different participants, right? You need capital, VCs or banks. You need large caps to provide support at the time to scale. You need people with the ideas. You need academics, right? And government with their policies to support. So I think, again, it's back to, I feel like there's a great foundation there. There's, like I said, strong infrastructure in the region, skilled labor forces we've talked a lot about as well, how the demographics would support that for a long time. And I think I mentioned it again, but these supportive policies. So taking all of these things, being intentional with the focus areas, which again, I believe is showing up based on what I've seen, really sets up for, I think, like I said, good growth, and especially coming back to semiconductors, good growth in a very good industry that is really important to the world.
Thank you. Okay.
I'd say I have two reflections, just having been, I mean, this is only my second time to Malaysia, so I'm no Malaysian expert. I mean, harping on the same thing, but I think you guys have more wins to celebrate than maybe you guys take credit for. So, I mean, we tell our founders all the time, like, you have to celebrate the small wins, right? The day you go public is just another day, but it's probably the day that's worth, like, you know, raising a glass. And even along the way, landing a big AWS contract, or going through some phase of digital transformation, like, may as well own it and enjoy it. And tomorrow, you know, it can be day one again, but like today we can enjoy it. So I think that's one. I think you guys actually like e-fisheries and Grab. And I think you have more like fundamental things going for you in the right direction at the moment. I had a second one and it totally escaped my train of thought. You go.
Okay. No, I'll just add to what both Audrey and Cack said, completely agree. I think there's all the right ingredients. We have the right problems to solve. I think we can kind of make it to the environment more amenable. But the one thing I'd like to touch on is skilling, right? I really feel that that's one thing that can accelerate. Like I said, fundamentally, success is driven by people. And we have a lot to offer in terms of talent in ASEAN. Just from the way, you know, the diversity has made us a lot more fungible in terms of the things we could do. And we have invested since 2017, we've skilled up 1.3 million people across ASEAN. We still don't, I mean, there's so much more to do that I feel that in terms of, you know, there is a stat about 80% of companies say that they are looking for AI skills in the digital workforce going forward. But the same people say 75% of them say they don't know where it's going to come from, right? So that's a different type. It's not only technology. With new AI, in the field of AI, it's also about how you ask questions. How do you kind of interact with these models? And while it has democratized technology, it has changed the need for skilling as well. So I think we can all do collectively a lot more in terms of governments, businesses to really kind of drive that. And that will create innovation, that will create awareness, and you know, we can start building from there.
You're right. The second thing I was going to say was AI. Like, I do think AI is going to be globally distributed, and it's not going to benefit one region over another differently. And you know, ChatGPT came out 2 years ago in November, so it hasn't been that long. And a lot of the industries that Malaysia is deep in, I think, are ones that are going to be positively benefited from AI. So, and we talked about, you know, be on the side of America to innovate versus Europe to regulate, and I think that could create a good ecosystem here.
Sorry, there is a question from the gentleman with the cap. Can somebody get him a mic? He's sitting next to Anthony. I think it's that section seems to be the source of all questions today. Contagious, I think it's Anthony. Thank you. Can you tell us who you are and your question?
Sure. Thank you, distinguished panel, for this wonderful session. My name is Victor. I represent a company called Selvendran Enterprise. It's my first time coming to Khazanah Megatrends, and thank you for everything that you've done. My question relates to a speech that Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Sri Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim made on the 28th of May 2024 at Semicon Southeast Asia 2024. In point 25 of Prime Minister Anwar's speech, he said that he offers Malaysia as the most neutral and non-aligned location for semiconductor production to help build a more secure and resilient global semiconductor supply chain. So the question is, how do you anticipate that Malaysia can not only capitalize upon this promise, but also maintain its neutrality in the geopolitical contestation between the great powers, and in turn construct a stronger value proposition for itself in creating a better ecosystem for the world globally and potentially for the union of the interests of the great powers in the days ahead? Thank you.
That's a win-win question, I think, for you, Cack. It's a new term, I learned.
Yeah. So again, I think this really is going back to, like Sev said, like the win-win, or Cack earlier, like win-win-win. Like I said, semiconductor demand is on track to double by the end of this decade. You heard the president today mention that as well, like 1 trillion in 2030. And it's an amazing time rich with opportunity because, like I said, pretty much everybody in the world is focused on developing their semiconductor capability. So I think my advice, my outlook is that basically the ASEAN region, with kind of the policies they're putting in place, the focus, and again, the natural resources and infrastructure that you have put you in a great position to grow and take advantage of this kind of really large opportunity that's in front of us all with regard to semiconductors.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey. So I think it's a very nice segue to our next session. I hope we've not taken away too many bullet or data points. My apologies to Riz. Happy to wrap up today's session with a very, very big thank you to our three speakers who have traveled to be with us today. Very loud. Thank you. They clapped in before. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Selv and panelists. Please step forward so we can take a photograph.